All right, Mr. Mayor, we are web streaming. We can begin when you're ready.
Okay, let's go ahead and call to order the special counsel subcommittee meeting. Before we get started, I'd like to remind the subcommittee and participants of some procedural items for today's meeting. During the meeting, participants will remain muted when not speaking. If subcommittee members or participants have a question or a comment, please use the raised hand feature. Speakers will be called upon to speak one at a time. This City Council meeting, subcommittee meeting, is being conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with State of California Executive Order N-29-20 regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Members of the public may provide audio public comment by connecting to the teleconference meeting online or by telephone and use the raised hand feature to request to speak, *9 on your telephone. Teleconference meeting details are available on the Council subcommittee agenda. Captions are available to viewers accessing the meeting via Zoom. Captions can be displayed or hidden using the live transcript button in Zoom. City Clerk, may we please have roll call?
Yes, Chair Klein.
Present.
Member Hendricks.
Attending.
Member Larson.
Present.
3 present participating via teleconference.
Okay, and we have a presentation.
Yes, let me pull that up. Chair and subcommittee members, David Carnahan, the City Clerk. Just want to give you a brief overview of some operational changes that we've made at the staff level since the February 11th subcommittee meeting. Here, if we can get the slides to advance. Well, there we go. This is the outline. For the public, to make it a little easier to access the Zoom link for our public meetings, we've added the Zoom link to the public meetings page. It shows up for each meeting under the meeting details page. And then right at the top of each agenda, the link is there as well. Previously, the public had to download the agenda and kind of navigate to the middle of the first page. This was a suggestion from one of our board chairs, and it's quick to implement, and I think has been really helpful for the public, especially if you're trying to join and participate from a mobile phone or something like that. The study issues page has had 2 updates, the first of which is an anticipated completion date has been added. This will help communicate to the public, kind of when they should, see work on each study issue and when they can anticipate having it resolved. So this will also, alleviate questions to staff when it's sort of, something's taking a year or 2. It's a little more clear to the public that work is still being done. Staff anticipate getting it done at a certain point in time instead of kind of there being some concern in limbo of what's happening with the different study issues. Additionally, the graphic timeline showing the study issue process has been expanded to cover the whole year so that it's really clear that the process doesn't just start, 3 or 4 months before the budget issue workshop, or the study issue workshop, but it really is a year-round process. We are working on a social media outreach campaign, so trying to increase public engagement in board and commission meetings. We're trying a 3-month pilot, highlighting one board and commission each month, and we're going to have a little video interview with either the chair or another member of the respective board and commission, and then highlighting an agenda item that we think either will have a lot of community interest or would really benefit from increase in community interest. So we started that last month with Parks and Rec. We're anticipating promoting Housing and Human Services this month, and then one more board and commission next month, and we'll see, how the engagement goes over social media. And then we, had a request to have a public calendar that members of the public could sync to their phone, and so this is now live. It has functionality where you basically subscribe, and it lists all of the council meetings, and as well as board and commission meetings, and kind of select other items like the listening sessions are added there as well. This is an add-on service. It's something that staff are doing in addition to maintaining the Zoom calendar, the YouTube calendar, and the legislative calendar, and the city's webpage calendar. So we are hoping that in the long run, when the city's website, the content management system is replaced, that this functionality could be incorporated there if the new system supplies that. And then in about 2 more years, when the agenda management system, we look at if we want to replace that or move forward, if that could be added functionality there. So we don't have, we can take this standalone tool and incorporate it into something where we're already maintaining a calendar. Then for chair and vice chair training, we're working with an outside consultant to have really kind of an in-depth 2-hour training, likely in August, once the new chair and vice chair for each boarding commission have been selected, to really focus on how to effectively run a meeting, a public meeting. And this would not replace, but would be in addition to the current chair and vice chair training that are conducted with the city attorney's office and the clerk's office. And then there was some clarification to staff liaisons about, when were this request to add hyperlinks within larger documents, making sure that they understand that these are hyperlinks sort of within a document, as opposed to hyperlinks that take you out of a document into a different PDF or something like that. So it just is to help navigate large documents within themselves, as opposed to having something where, as you're clicking through a document, you're having to download something different and you end up with multiple tabs or multiple open documents. And then we looked at the templates that are sent out by staff liaisons to boards and commissions when members of the public submit comments to a boarding commission. And the intent there was to make the language seem a little friendlier and more inviting. And I have a sample here of that updated language. And that is a brief update on our operational changes. Are there any questions or comments from the subcommittee?
Any comments? First, subcommittee member Larson, or council member Larson. We'll just go.
Thank you. And thank you, David, for stepping us through all those changes. And I think that although some of the changes, I'm glad to hear that a number of the changes were easy to implement, but I think they really will make it easier for the public as well to connect with our meetings. Just one question on the linking and the hyperlinks. It sounds like that's still being rolled out, maybe a work in progress, because I noticed that, for example, the packet for this meeting still has links to Legistar instead of jumping to the individual items.
So I'm thinking about like the agenda for the meeting. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the agenda itself will continue to link to the web page. The alternative to that is having one big PDF that someone would have to download. The council packet, the PDF of just the agenda is usually under a megabyte. Sometimes the full packet is 40, 50, 60 megabytes. And so I think when you get into that each individual staff report, that's where we're hoping the linking will be within the report itself.
Oh,
I think it would just,
okay.
If you're someone who just wants to look at the agenda and see what's upcoming, you may not really want to download, 600 pages of a PDF just to find out if it's a meeting you want to attend or not.
Yeah. I guess what I was really thinking of is I download the entire PDF, the big one, and then I go to the agenda page, but then if I click on that, that takes me back to Legistar instead of navigating within the document. But I understand it's a little thing. I don't want staff to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it will help when people do download large documents and then maybe they're away from the internet to be able to navigate if it's easy to do.
Okay, well, thank you. So I guess that just to make sure I'm understanding, you're thinking, right, when you download that full PDF packet and then you're looking at the agenda, you would like when you click on, agenda item 1 or agenda item 2, when you click that link, right, it wouldn't take you to Legistar. It would just take you later down in that PDF. Okay.
Yeah.
That I think we can explore and I think should be manageable, but we'll look into it and let you know how easy it is. I don't anticipate it being too hard.
Understood. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Hendricks.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the chair and vice chair training, additional training that was going on. And when you're mentioning that, the thing that went through my mind are we giving, the commission members training? And it almost seems to me that I've always found, if you're a chair running a meeting, if everybody who's in the meeting understands everything you're trying to do, they can actually participate in the meeting easier and better. And so it's just a question, this chair, vice chair training, would it actually be appropriate to actually do to the whole board and commission so that the board and commissioners know, here's what the chair is trying to do. Here's the structure of what they're trying to do. So they're able to follow the chair's lead easier, if that makes sense. Have you guys thought about anything like that?
So, I mean, it did come up in our conversation. It just becomes a little bit of a much larger training, right? When instead of inviting, 10 chairs, 10 vice chairs, and we're intending to invite the staff liaisons as well, right? So they kind of know what the chairs are trying to do and can help support them. Once you invite all 60 members, even if 40 of them show up, it becomes, I think, a little more challenging to manage the training. And then it also, once you start having quorums of these different bodies, we end up potentially needing to notice the meeting for the public. And having a public training just has a different dynamic than being able to ask kind of either the complex or maybe embarrassing question that you might, in a private environment, be willing to ask the trainer, but you may not want to ask the question in front of 60 people plus the public.
Yeah, this is we run up against this challenge all the time. Again, I would just ask if staff could think about how do we get all the board members or the commission members to be able to be a better understanding of, what is the flow of how the meeting goes? How are they supposed to interact? We still have the situation where we have people that we're appointing to boards and commissions that have never been to a board and commission meeting that they're getting onto. And when you've got people, if that's the other members, it just makes it that much harder or more challenging for the chair to run the meeting. So I'm glad all of the things you're talking about. I think that's something we need to continue to think about of how we deal with that. It's not in place of anything you're talking about, but maybe some addition that might need to additionally be done. Thank you.
So Glenn, I think that I understand your point of view, and I would like to let us get through the first training and see how it goes and how we can expand on that.
Yeah, and that's what I said. I would do what you're going to do, but I think we should keep this topic in mind. And if the training spawns some ideas of how to do that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just have a few comments. Yes, I definitely feel that some of this is education, and I do agree, focusing on the chair and vice chairs and how they run a meeting, being liaison to multiple meetings over the years and seeing sometimes there's, let's say more experienced and less experienced chairs along the way. I do think that that's critical. One thing, David, you mentioned that training is in August or July. I saw, at least from a documentation standpoint, I thought it said July and you just said August. Is that just this year, or is that going to be planned kind of an ongoing thing after we figure out how it works?
So we want to see how it works this year. The add-on training, I'll double check the slide. I know we normally conduct the city attorney, city clerk training in July, right? Because we want to queue it up so all the boards and commissions have had a chance to select their chair and vice chair, and then we train them before they have their August meeting. This training wasn't envisioned to necessarily have to fall within that finite window, because we're looking at like 1 to 2 weeks for that. The normal training can happen because we have to have everyone have their appointments made for their chair and vice chair, and then we need to train everyone before they can start serving. So we have, appointments to a chair and vice chair can be made the 4th week in July, and then someone needs to serve as chair the 1st week in August. So we try to have that normal training kind of that last week in July or very early August. This training being kind of a new idea and wanting to miss a night when there is a boarding commission meeting. There's in a 4-week month, there's like 3 potential days that aren't a Friday when we can have a boarding. We can have a training that does not conflict with any regular boarding commission meeting. So that's where we're targeting August for this first one, seeing how it goes. If it appears that we really should have had this training before they serve in their first meeting, then we can look at moving it earlier. But I think as kind of this first pilot year, we'll see how it goes and see if the timing is right or if we should move it up or back.
Great. And, and I just want to thank you for the updates, especially to kind of the study issues webpage, the use of social media. I do think that the highlights of Park and Rec and getting, having our residents better understand what our boards and commissions are doing, ultimately, I think will be, instrumental in getting more people to apply at the end of the day. And so I do think that that has a lot of value, and figuring out, how to show that this, this is what's working, this is what's happening within the city. Because I do think that that is a problem sometimes, that there are these boards and commissions that, sometimes it's not until people say, I want to get more involved, what's out there, that they find out that there's a board or commission that they might have always had an interest in, and attending meetings, or at least staying up to date on agendas, they didn't even know it existed. So I think, trying to highlight that from the city, the government, city government's social media, I think has a lot of value. And then just generally, highlighting the hard work that they're doing is good. But I do think, especially some of the changes that have already been put in place, make things a little bit easier for myself, as well as I heard from other commissioners. I do think that being clear and just trying to make links work a little bit better, all those little things do make a difference at the end of the day. And I do agree with what Commissioner Larson said. When I download the full packet, it is, I end up searching quite often, trying to find where, attach or item number 2 or item number 3 or 4 are within the document. Now, of course, that then means that staff has to deal with kind of 2 agendas, a bare bones agenda that just goes to registrar or within the document. But I do think that it has a certain amount of value just when you're dealing with large PDFs.
Well, then just let me give you just a quick tip before as we look to implementing that change. In the existing council packet that you download, if you open the bookmarks, there is a bookmark to each item, but that's, I know, an extra step. And that's a training piece that now the 3 of you have as knowledge, but obviously we don't want to rely on having to train the public on how to make our documents easier to use. We want to make them easier to use.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll go ahead and open the public hearing.
Just, can I make one other quick comment on that?
Sure.
David, that might be something that would be worthwhile, just putting a sentence at the top about the bookmark thing. Because that's a challenge I have. I was going to say, once you figure out how to do this really well, I got a couple other agencies, you can explain it to them, because I get even larger packets from VTA and Caltrain. And that's my biggest challenge of how you pop to a particular item. And this is a great safety tip of, here, just open the bookmarks and you're off to the races. I mean, if we just put that in as a sentence up there, I think that'd be a big help to a lot of different people.
Well, thank you for that suggestion. And we do, the various clerks of these different agencies, we do reach out to each other and collaborate. But we also get requests, usually when I get a request for, oh, Sunnyvale is doing something well, can you tell us how we did it? It's usually because one of you told them, oh, this was good. And then same thing. So, when you experience things that work well in other agencies, please share that with us. I can't say we'll implement it all, but if there's tips and tricks that you appreciate from other agencies, we don't want to reinvent any wheels. We don't have to.
I don't want to downplay any other agency, but Sunnyvale is always tops on my list.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, now that I know about the bookmarks, I think actually the bookmarks are even better than having the link in the agenda, because looking at them, they actually drill down into the individual attachments, and I can get a much finer granularity of navigation that way. So I think just knowing about the bookmarks solves the thing that I was trying to get to. Thanks.
Good. Well, it's going to be much easier for us to add a line of text somewhere. So we'll look at that versus, changing the links as well.
Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and open the public hearing. Since we remain in a virtual setting, I'll ask the public to use the virtual raise hand button or dial *9 on your telephone to indicate that they wish to speak. The city clerk will then ask you to unmute your microphone when it's your turn to address the subcommittee. City clerk, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor or Mr. Chair. First up is Ralph Kenton, followed by Crystal Wickham. Ralph, you've been unmuted and you have 3 minutes to address the subcommittee. So Ralph, you should see a pop-up on your screen asking you to unmute.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to David Carnahan and his excellent staff for all the great work they've done in the last several months on this project. I have a question and a comment on the slide that you were presenting a moment ago on the matter of policy response, updated response template. You mentioned that this would be a little more friendly than the one we currently have. And I have a question at the bottom. It says, if you have additional comments or questions, please contact me directly at an email and phone number. Who would that be? Who would offer their phone number and name for further questions? And secondly, I believe that in some of the general inputs that come in, I've seen people in the public send something to the city council. And generally a response I've seen go back is that someone will contact you within 3 days. And I'm wondering, is this the thing that would go back then within 3 days?
Thank you, Ralph. Anything else? And we'll follow up on your question in a minute.
I'm finished.
Thank you.
Next up is Crystal Wickham. Crystal, you've been unmuted and you have 3 minutes to address the subcommittee.
Hi, subcommittee and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I wanted to echo Ralph Kenton's statements about staff being so responsive and making a lot of changes that make it easier to access and find out information about board and commission meetings and meetings in general. I did want to raise a new issue, or maybe it's not a new issue, but it was new to me. I think you all know I'm chair of the Sustainability Commission, and there are 2 openings currently. And I was, talking to various community members, asking if they might want to apply to the commission. And, one person I spoke to said, "Oh, I would really love to participate, but I'm not eligible because I'm not registered to vote, and I can't register to vote because I'm not a citizen of the U.S." And so this just got me thinking, well, this person is paying taxes, they're civically engaged and wanting to participate. And so I just wanted to raise the question of, is this registered to vote requirement, something that we want to continue, because there are active, engaged non-citizens that are here legally and working and paying taxes that we may want to include in the process of being on boards and commissions. So I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, that was the final public speaker.
Okay.
Would you like me to address any of the questions raised?
Yes, if you could. As far as response questions, go ahead.
So regarding the response questions, in the template, right, if you have further questions, insert name, insert email, that's the staff liaison that they would put their name and their email in there. So if a member of the public had follow-up questions, that's who they could follow up with. And then, staff should be responding in a very timely manner. There isn't the same automated response as when you send a response to council that I'm aware of that says it will definitely be within 3 days, but our staff liaisons are generally very responsive to requests from members of the public and input.
Okay, thank you. And John, I would just like you to clarify, and I don't think this overlaps with one of our next item that's coming up, but as far as opposed to age, as far as being registered to vote, and we've talked about this in the past about the five boards and commissions that are defined by charter that have that definition versus the other 5, and what could be done from changing policy to allow more participation. Could you say a few words on that?
Sure. Of course, the more challenging is the requirements that are set forth in the charter, because that can only be changed by a vote of the people. And so since there is a requirement to be a registered voter, that would eliminate anybody who's under 18 or somebody who is not a citizen. So the council would have to consider placing a charter amendment on a ballot, maybe in 2022 would be the next obvious, least expensive way of doing it, to make that minor change. As to the committees that are created by ordinance or by council policy, those are within the council's purview, and it could be accomplished by changing either the ordinance or the policy, whatever the vehicle for setting forth those. I think it was all set forth, if I remember correctly, in the council policy on boards and commissions. So that would be the easier one to make the change.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I do think that, and we talked a little bit about this at our last meeting, I think, just trying to get more participation. Definitely there's the concept of being registered vote is always the easiest, but as we'll talk about a little bit later, the application itself makes things, the application is kind of declaration as far as truthful and all that. Vice Mayor Hendricks.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question about this, because this all seems to be coming and is generated from an email I think that all of us council members got. There was a person who said, I got a couple weeks ago, I assume you guys got it too. But if we wanted to address the question, the non-charter boards and commissions, because that's clearly the easier way to go. What do you see is that something here we as a committee would say, here, let's go ahead and go off and do that? Or is that a study issue item where we go ahead and rank and decide whether or not we want staff to go ahead and work on this? I'm just confused from a process perspective, because I'll just say at least the email I got that was about this, I actually spoke to the person that had this, and the board and commission they wanted to get, they had never even actually attended it. They're an engaged member of person. I'm not saying they're bad or that they wouldn't be a good person, but we're all talking about trying to maybe change one of our policies for a person, at least that's where it started from. It applied to many more people who had not even yet attended a meeting. And I'm just trying to understand, from a process perspective, how we would decide to look at this.
Terry or John, do you have a comment from a process standpoint? I have my take.
Well, I think go ahead. I was going to say, I think it could go either way. It could come out of the subcommittee as a recommendation from the subcommittee to the council, or you could propose it as a study issue item. But the study issue item will take a little longer than just coming out of the subcommittee, since we're actively working.
Or the subcommittee could recommend the creation of a study issue.
But the study issue, but then it would be ranked.
Then it would be exactly
who does it. It's either, are we going to go ahead and say, here, let's go ahead and work on this right away, or are we going to say, here, this would be something that would be a normal, one of the kind of things where we decide and rank whether or not we want staff to expend energy on this, because this is not, I don't know that it's a huge effort, but it's not a no effort.
So I don't know what email you received. I've had multiple people ask me about this requirement over the years and wanting to get more involved and saying, oh, I would like to. And some of them actually regularly attend some of these meetings as citizens because they can't be on the board and commission. That being said, as we talk about, accessibility, equity, I do think that there is value in getting as many people, whether or not they're going through the process of becoming a naturalized citizen, but being residents and taxpayers. I do think that there is value, and for the 5 boards and commissions that aren't part of of the charter, I do think that this board could make a recommendation. As far as, and this question goes to, I think, David, the biggest issue for the registration standpoint is that it makes it easier to qualify as residents, correct?
So yeah, I mean, that's a really easy way for us to confirm that, they state they're a registered voter. We call ROV. They either are or they aren't. However, we'll get to it kind of in our next policy item, but I'll just restate it then. A number of agencies don't require voter registration, and so they just rely on that signature on their application that says, they're signing under penalty of perjury. And so there isn't necessarily a checking, right, of the items that are listed in their application. So again, that comes down to, right, counsel's comfort of, would you want to rely on a statement like that as opposed to being able to check someone's voter registration status? And we could talk to, about, some cities. We'll talk more about it in that item about the like one or two things other agencies do to verify registration, but most of them do just rely on that signed application as the proof that they live where they say that they live.
Okay. So I don't want to build, and since we're going to be moving that to that item next, and especially since this isn't an agendized item, we can talk a little bit about that conceivably later, or for final comments, conceivably we might have to call another meeting of the subcommittee at a later date. But I do think, that there's value, and what, Chair Wickham said. I do think that getting as much and seeing that, more than half of our population is from outside of the US, and how many have become citizens and how many have lived here for 20 or 30 years and still have not become citizens. It's trying to meet some sort of equilibrium between those two things. But let's close that issue for now. Were there any other? Go ahead.
Well, let me just throw out just two numbers, just as John had mentioned, if there was ever a consideration for a ballot measure. Last March, we consolidated with a special election, and it cost us $236,000 to have something on the ballot. For our regular election in November 2020, we had an estimate of $100,000. So just keeping those, there's a big, more than twice as much cost if we wanted to have an off-cycle election, even if we were consolidating, much less if we ever wanted to have something on an election where we could consolidate.
Right. But we could definitely change the policy on the non-charter boards and commissions, much like we defined it for a committee by council policy, and not, and I think, and going to what the vice mayor said, not going into a great study, a big study as far as that's concerned, and just change it as policy ad hoc. But we'll talk about that more with the next item. Okay, or with our first official item. Next is public comment. So I see no more comments from the subcommittee. Next is public comment. Members of the public will now have an opportunity to address the subcommittee on topics not listed on today's agenda. The section is limited to 15 minutes and may be extended or continued after general business section of the agenda. Individuals are limited to one appearance with a maximum of up to 3 minutes per speaker. A reminder to the public, please raise your digital hand or dial *9 on your telephone if you wish to address the subcommittee. The city clerk will then ask you to unmute your microphone when it's your turn to address the subcommittee. City clerk, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak under public comment?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Next is our consent calendar. Since we remain in a virtual setting, I'll ask the public to use the virtual raise your hand feature or dial *9 on your telephone to indicate that they wish to speak. The city clerk will then ask you to unmute your microphone when it's your turn to address the subcommittee. City clerk, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on the consent calendar item?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Is there a motion from my colleagues? Vice Mayor Hendricks?
I move the consent calendar.
Councilmember Larson? You're muted, or I didn't hear you.
Oh, second.
Thank you. City clerk, can you please conduct a roll call vote?
Yes. First up, Councilmember Larson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hendricks?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Next is general business. Our first item is item 21-0548, survey results of board and commission members under 18 years of age. Is there a staff report?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. David Carnahan, the city clerk again. So at the last subcommittee, there was interest from the subcommittee on kind of just finding out what other cities do as far as allowing membership on their boards and commissions for individuals that are under 18 years of age. Following up on that interest, we did a city clerk listserv question and then reached out to each city in Santa Clara County. The city clerk listserv is hosted by the League of Cities, and questions that go out there reach every clerk in the state. Now, having said that, we did not receive an overabundance of responses. We received 7 responses, and I think one of the reasons for that is that a lot of cities may not have provisions for people that are under 18 serving on boards and commissions, or a few agencies don't have their requirements for membership on their boards and commissions don't differentiate on things that would cause age to be a factor. So where registered voting is required, that obviously causes age to be a factor. Some agencies, the membership requirement just says must be a resident and doesn't address age. So we didn't get a response from those agencies. And then a lot of them agencies do have something similar to the Teen Advisory Committee or some other youth commission. And for those interested, the Institute for Local Government does maintain a list of California youth commissions and councils. It's a little out of date, but it's a good place to start for anyone wanting to do a deeper dive. And then we did confirm with the Registrar of Voters Office that if someone is eligible or will be eligible to register to vote and they pre-register to vote, so they're under 18, but they'll be eligible to vote when they turn 18, we are able to verify that they are pre-registered to vote or are not pre-registered to vote. And here of the 7 cities that responded, Berkeley makes boarding commission membership open for folks under 18 for almost all of their boards and commissions. And then they're usually appointed by either district council members or by the full city council, depending on the board or commission. And then the agency relies on the application as proof of residency. Kingsburg, their community service commission has a student member that is actually appointed by the high school. So they don't need to live within the city, but they must be attending the high school. Lafayette has a youth services commission that's appointed by council. Again, they rely on the application as proof of residency. Los Gatos has an interesting model where they have a youth commission that's designed to foster civic pride and involvement. And the youth commission, from within its members, the youth commission itself, so that the commission is appointed by council, and then the youth commissioners select one member and an alternate from amongst the commissioners to serve on other boards and commissions. So each board and commission has a youth commission member that's selected from within the youth commission and an alternate. And then they rely on the application as proof of residence. That's a model I was unfamiliar with, but sounded just a little unique. Then Oakley has a youth advisory council that sounds pretty similar to Sunnyvale's Teen Advisory Council. And they actually I'm not sure who appointed the initial members, but they kind of continue to appoint themselves. So as they age out of being eligible, they make appointments to their own body. And then they need to live within the city or attend a school that is in the city. And then they confirm residency by mailing. So for their interviews, they don't call anyone, they don't email anyone, they mail the invitation. So if someone does not receive the invitation, that means they likely don't live at the address where they state that they live. Then Sierra Madre has a community services commission with one member who has to be under 18 years old. And again, they rely on the application as proof of residency, and council makes that appointment. Then the Livermore Area Youth Commission is an interesting hybrid. It's supported by the Livermore Area Recreation and Park District, as well as the city of Livermore. And then they have 3 members that are generally adults, so they have to be at least 21 years old, and then 15 members that are in the ages 12 through 20. And they also rely on the application as proof of residency. Moving a little closer to home, here are the results of what is done for each city in Santa Clara County. For the most part, most agencies have a teen or a youth commission. and which is the only one that is open to folks that are under 18 years old. And they vary, as appointment by staff or appointment by council. Residency is generally required for most of these meeting bodies, and they didn't have anything that was done to confirm residency other than accepting the application. The Gilroy Commission, members need to live within the Gilroy Unified School District, which I understand is slightly larger than the city of Gilroy. And then we'll go through, we don't need to go through each one in detail. In Los Altos Hills, they did at some point in time, someone who was under 18 applied to their emergency communications committee, and council made that appointment. So they don't have a particular provision that makes that committee open to folks under 18, but they don't have a restriction against it. And then Los Gatos, we already covered since they had responded to the listserv request. Milpitas and one other agency, the mayor makes the appointments and then council confirms the appointments for their youth commission. And again, Sierra Madre and Milpitas, the youth commission or youth advisory commission, those are the only ones that are open to individuals under 18 years old. And Morgan Hill, very similar, although their membership on their youth action council, folks can live within Morgan Hill, San Martin, or as long as they attend the Morgan Hill Unified School District, they are eligible to serve. And then Mountain View has a youth advisory committee. Moving on to, so Palo Alto, their membership requirements are one of the cities that does not, list being a registered voter, nor does it have any age requirements. So sort of without a restriction on age, individuals under 18 would be eligible to be appointed. And residency is required for most boards and commissions, but again, they don't have a procedure other than relying on the application to verify residency. And then San Jose, their appointments are either by mayor or council, either city council at large, or most of them are appointed by district. And there are a few of them that do not require membership for members be over 18 years old. They have quite an extensive number of boards and commissions, so I wasn't able to dig into each one to determine which ones had the requirements to be 18 versus not. And then Santa Clara County, they have a staff appointed youth commission similar to Sunnyvale's Teen Advisory Committee. And then Saratoga, the members they need to be residents of the city, and they also need to attend a middle or a high school in the town. So if someone lived within the city but attended a private school in another city or had an interdistrict public school transfer, they would not be able to serve on the commission. And that is the presentation. It's open for questions and comments.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the subcommittee members? I have a general question as far as the TAC is concerned. And, I was supposed to meet with the TAC last spring, just before things kind of fell apart from a COVID standpoint, and haven't actually closed the loop with them since. And I know the TAC is more focused on advising staff as opposed to advising council. Can someone give me a better idea on how they've been doing under COVID, how they're, as opposed to how their main focus has been for the last few years? Because, I hadn't been active in working with them, was finally going to meet with them. And then, things went remote for pretty much everybody. Does Terry or David know operationally what's happening?
So I know as the pandemic, started and we stopped being able to have in-person events, the TAC has been really involved in the advisory committee on advising staff on, things of interest for particular events and some event planning for the teen community. And they reached out trying to figure out how they could transition some of their ideas into virtual events. And unfortunately, given, the concerns of having a very public event where we're advertising, hi, we'd like to make this open to minors, it makes it a little challenging to have any kind of an interactive event in a virtual space. similar to why during our council meetings and subcommittee meetings, the chat feature isn't there and we operate in a webinar format. We recommended that they operate in the same format, which didn't really meet their goals, right? They wanted to have these very interactive spaces. And that just, raised a lot of red flags as far as the city, promoting the likenesses of minors online and inviting kind of, all the different Zoom bombing things that we've heard about. We didn't want to sponsor that and support that as something that could occur. So my understanding is, to the extent that the local school districts, they have sort of their own communities and their own Zoom licensing, they're able to do a little bit more of those interactive events because they don't, for us as a city, in order to get people to come to our virtual event, we would need to heavily promote it online. And heavily promoting it online means putting the information on how to join on the website. And that then, lets all these robots that help people Zoom bomb find it. So it really, unfortunately, the transition to virtual events that were really interactive and worth hosting wasn't successful. And so they, the idea of a webinar, they weren't interested in exploring. And I also understand, as we move towards, not knowing exactly when we're going to reopen, I think that the TAC is relatively inactive at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And that was my basic takeaway from where the TAC stands after COVID began. As far as I'll say past operations, it sounds like it was more event driven and kind of teen events as opposed to reaching out to them on, let's say, what's going to the different boards and commissions. So kind of closing the loop from, this is coming in front of the Parks Commission or Parks and Rec Commission, or this is coming in front of the Arts Commission or Sustainability Commission, issues that teens might be interested in giving feedback on. That wasn't seen as, and definitely anybody could, apply for those agenda updates, but it wasn't seen as doing outreach to teens to at least come to meetings, or this might be critical. Is that true? Or
yeah, the focus really was, focusing on teen interests related to recreation and volunteerism. So they did have a big focus on events and promoting volunteerism as opposed to kind of that policy information or policy advocacy role that you're proposing. That they didn't do a lot of, the Sustainability Commission has this topic that we think would be, teens might be interested. Let's do some publicity and reach out to our teen groups to promote those things.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you. Vice Mayor Hendricks.
Yeah, so I mean that's all really good information and stuff. I guess that my kind of question is, what problem are we trying to solve, and is this something we're looking to really kind of to you guys? We want to recommend to change, again, probably non-charter boards and commissions, type things. So I've had kids. I've seen with my own kids who are under 18. I've seen all their friends and stuff. There are a lot of really great kids out there that are people that are under 18. Is that our biggest problem, that we don't have enough under 18 people on our boards and commissions? And I guess that's a question to you guys or to whoever. I don't see that as our biggest, challenge. If I was going down my list of things where we've talked about within the boards and commissions and what we wanted to try and improve. And by the way, I'll just make this generic comment. People can participate with our boards and commissions or with the city council. You don't have to be a board and commission, member to be a vital, engaged person on these different things. So that's kind of just where I'm at.
Okay, and I'll respond a little bit to that. I think it's participation. From my standpoint, it's getting diversity within our boards and commissions as much as possible. And whether or not, and as we've seen, we have a council member now that was probably one of our youngest board and commission members, that getting them involved, getting youth involved in local government, giving back, conceivably sets them on a path that they might not have normally done. For myself, I didn't get involved with the city until I was in my 30s when I started going to board and commission meetings and then deciding that I wanted to get on one. And so I do think that there's value in, while they're, let's say, locked at home with their parents still, to if they're interested in a specific topic and they think that they could, give back to their community and have an interest, I do think that providing that option is a positive, is a positive influence, much like the TAC, although the TAC seems to be slightly different. And I agree with what you're saying, Vice Mayor, on yes, anybody can participate, and that's what I tell people that aren't registered to vote and all of that. That being said, there is a little more, let's say, level of contribution and commitment once they get on those boards and commissions. So that's my take on it. Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all that information, David, and pulling it together. It's actually eye-opening for me to see all the different variations that cities have come up with, whether they do it by age or grade or residing within the city itself or a related school district boundary. And is it just for our equivalent of a teen advisory commission, or is it something broader? There are a lot more options to choose from than I had even thought about. If we do explore having more involvement from teens in particular on our boards or commissions, I would want to proceed cautiously. I don't think I'd want to just eliminate the age requirement, but I'd want to put some structure around it. And I don't yet know what that structure might look like, but I don't want to just throw the door open. And so the Los Gatos models was actually a little intriguing from that perspective. But something I'd want to know more about and spend more time thinking about before deciding to actually go down that path. But yeah, some limited way to provide, to foster some more involvement, especially teens who are in their later teens and getting close to the point where they're about to become adults, about to graduate from high school, and then will actually be eligible for boards and commissions. It might be nice to have a pathway with some structure around it. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, Seeing no other questions, I will open the public hearing. Since we remain in a virtual setting, I'll ask the public to use the virtual raise hand button or dial *9 on your telephone to indicate that they wish to speak. The city clerk will then ask you to unmute your microphone when it's your turn to address the subcommittee. City clerk, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, first up is Ralph Kenton, followed by Donna Eskridge. Ralph, you've been unmuted and you have 3 minutes to address the city council.
Yes, that is very interesting. Thank you for that presentation. I was thinking as we went through this, there might be two alternatives, maybe a short-term and a long-term. The short-term alternative might be to coagulate and consolidate some of the best ideas from this slide presentation into a more defined activity for our own teen commission or committee. So that would be a possibility, and begin to formulate something like that, as opposed to my suggestion B, which would be to continue on the recent discussion in this Zoom meeting here about actually making them as individuals part of the boards or commissions, which seems to be a lot more complicated. So I think that we should do something. The reason I'm bringing this up is I vividly remember two instances where a group of teens in high school had come to a Parks and Rec Commission meeting sometime in the last 8 years. And I also think there was one when they came to the city council meeting. I think it was on cigarettes in the park, if I remember rightly. We have just an incredible group of young people here in Sunnyvale, as exhibited by those who've taken the time to formulate a presentation at these various meetings. I would like to see some way that we could latch into the group, the TAC as we see it now, especially after we come out of the pandemic and maybe the city opens up. So my suggestion number 2 or B would be to try to figure out some way of communicating between the boards and commissions and the TAC in whatever activities they're interested in or whatever ideas they might have. And possibly we could invite them to some form of a meeting. I know they were pretty active in the Parks and Rec meeting when they made a presentation. I'm taking a cue from what we're doing now on the matter of public outreach. Very shortly, we'll be making a presentation, as was mentioned, to the neighborhood associations about 2 of our commissions. And possibly we could use that as a template and try to bring in the TAC in whatever condition it's in, and hopefully as it grows, as we go completely open in the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Donna Estridge. Donna, you've been unmuted and you have 3 minutes to address the subcommittee.
Okay, I think the having youth to be part of the commissions is a great idea. I know if we had youth on the Arts Commission, that would be very beneficial, especially for like when we have hands on the arts. And also Park and Recs, since a lot of young people do go to the parks and ride their bikes, their input would really be good. And also a lot of young people who might be considering higher education, being on a commission would be a really good extracurricular activity for their college applications and such. And also a lot of high schools have youth governments, and it would be nice if some of the high schools would potentially have those students who are interested in government in their high schools also participate in the actual city government, so they could see how the government really works. And yeah, so I think that would be a really great idea. I don't see where age, I should say, I think that their youth and their knowledge of the world and their eyesight is very beneficial for how they could visualize the city for themselves and for the future, and have kind of a fresh input into the commissions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, that was the final public comment. I did just have one thought to share that just popped up. One thing to contemplate as you think about if as the council and subcommittee think about, is there any interest in expanding, membership, is sort of the idea of encouraging people to apply, and it would look good on someone's college application. Just as we're going through somewhat a slew of resignations from boards and commissions, something just to consider as we look to people that are in an age group where they may want to serve for 1 or 2 years of a 4-year term. We just want to make sure that we're setting up a system where we're not encouraging a lot of people to fill in for 4-year terms, but they're only going to serve a portion of it. So it's just not something to, hold anyone back, but just something to contemplate as you think about how the subcommittee wants to recommend moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to council. Vice Mayor Hendricks.
Yeah, so I have a suggestion on how to move forward, but to David's last comment, we have a lot of people that don't fill out in their whole terms that goes on. So I don't think that's a particular issue. You guys have probably been able to tell by my comments, I'm not the most thrilled about this, but I can read, a room, and I can read the entire council. And the council being able to have a discussion about whether or not being able to have 18-year-olds, or even the question of whether or not you need to be registered to vote. I could see the council wanting to have a discussion about that. So let me just say this. I'm not making it as a formal motion yet, but just to get your guys' sense, and if you want to improve this, is that we ask staff to go back and bring to us for our next meeting, take a look at changes just for the boards and commissions that are not charter related. Let's start there with that subset and come back with a recommendation of a way that would be appropriate to allow less than 18-year-olds to be to fill out applications and go through the process to be. And, I don't know if we can go ahead and say this, be very specific to also include that it look at non-registered people, or if I can't be that specific in a motion, and other changes that might be, you come across between now and the next time we meet. I don't know how you two guys feel about, a motion somewhere along those lines.
John, do you have a comment, or is that fine? That beyond the scope is my question before we continue.
It's sort of it's close to being beyond the scope. It'd be nice.
Let me rephrase then, that we would have a motion to take a look at being able to deal with for the non-charters 18 or below. And if when staff brings something back, if there are other things that they find that might be appropriate for us to look at as well, that they could, bring that back as appropriate.
David?
And can I just confirm that it would be appropriate to interpret your other things as appropriate to maybe we have a few kind of non-substantive updates to the council policy? Would that be included in there, just to make sure it's not just the 18 and old and under?
Yeah, and like I said, yeah, if you came back with a la carte menu list of other things that you think are appropriate, if we're going to take a look at making changes in this, and then those will all be agendized at that next meeting, and we can, like I said, in an a la carte thing, we could either decide to include them or not include them as what goes up to the council. I'm just trying to find a way to try and address the multiple issues that we've heard.
I think that is essentially okay, because you're giving specific direction on the matter that we're hearing, and then you're essentially directing staff to return at a later date to provide the council options. So you're not really taking any action other than essentially asking to agendize.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to find a way to not be overly prescriptive and of what goes on.
I think that's fine.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Larson.
I will second that motion.
Okay.
Okay, well, I guess I turned that into an actual motion, good, of what goes on. This is not my highest priority in what I focus on, but like I said, I can read a room and understand, how my other council colleagues might feel about some of this stuff. But I do feel compelled to say, we're talking about this, like your path to get into this stuff is by being on the border commission. And I think we need to I want to do what I made the motion for, but I want to fundamentally make sure people understand that's not the only path. Before I got on the planning commission, I was on a different commission, and I attended a lot of planning commission meetings for over a year before I ever got on to the planning commission. So the path to be able to get into these things and understand stuff is to start to attend whatever board and commission you have a passion for. And that's what I think, regardless of how this goes forward, I think that's the real message we should put out to our residents, is if you have passion about something, then attend the meeting about it. Write letters, come, be public speakers at a council meeting about whatever that topic is, of what goes on. You can be engaged on these things without having to actually be on a board or commission. I see a lot of people who go to Leadership Sunnyvale and they come out of that and go, oh, well, I have to get on a board and commission, or I have to run for city council. That's not the case. There are lots of ways for people to participate. So I'm happy to go ahead and make this motion for us to try and do some expansion of what this is. But I think we need to be very careful, and the message is not just that we're expanding this, that this is the only path you have to be able to participate. There are lots of ways to participate in what goes on. So, and thanks for the second, Gustav.
Thank you. And Councilmember Larson.
Thank you for those comments. And I'll just add, I was looking at the council policy manual just now, looking at which boards and commissions are set up by the charter and which are not. And I only found 4 that are not charter commissions. So just to so that we can kind of keep it in mind which commissions we're talking about. It's Arts Commission, BPAC, Housing and Human Services, and Sustainability Commission. So those are the 4 that are not established by the charter. Interestingly, the Parks and Rec Commission is established by the charter, so it'd be much more difficult to make any changes there. So just wanted to put that out there to kind of help set the expectations of which commissions we might be talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Larson. And Vice Mayor, I totally agree. I do think that it's getting people involved, and as myself, I went to a lot of council meetings, BPAC meetings, planning commission meetings long before I applied to first BPAC and then planning commission. And I do think it's getting people involved. I do think from a accessibility equity standpoint, trying to get as many people involved, and we've seen, let's say, a lot of turnover in different boards and commissions in the last year. So, getting a wider swath of possible applicants, I do think has value, and beyond, I appreciate what the motion is as far as bringing back, a list of options, and whether or not, we and or council will be up for all of those will be a bigger discussion. But that being said, I do, as a kind of a secondary thing, as the TAC is reinstated, that communication channel should be utilized much like any of our communication channels to give them, what's happening at arts and, at the Arts Commission, Sustainability Commission, BPAC, that I think making sure that we are telling, our youth, who then have their own network of communication, what's happening in the city, what issues that you have possibilities to give input on, not necessarily apply for those boards and commissions immediately, but how you can get involved. And we've seen, we have a very strong youth climate group, and, definitely some very strong bike advocates from our youth standpoint. So I do think that, not just expanding what the boards and commissions are, and conceivably we get someone from one of those commissions, or from the youth to join one of those commissions. But I do think that there's value in making sure that we do the appropriate outreach, and we'll see where this is coming back to council and coming back to us. So with that, City Clerk, can you please conduct a roll call vote?
First up, Mayor Klein, how do you vote?
Yes.
Councilmember Larson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hendricks?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. And our final item is item 21-0549, discussion and possible action regarding the Code of Ethics and the conduct for elected and appointed officials. Is there a staff report?
Just very briefly, the Code of Conduct and Ethics is reviewed by boards and commissions annually. During their annual review, the Planning Commission made a recommendation to council that it required some updates. When this was taken to council, council referred the policy to this body, the code, for possible review and possible updates. With that, we don't have any specific recommendations at this time for how that could be updated, and we're open to hearing what the subcommittee thinks would be, different areas where updates could be made, and what those updates could be.
Okay. Okay. So I'll kick off the discussion a little bit. I've talked to a few people who, and especially we had multiple people either at the council meeting or the last subcommittee meeting talking about the Code of Ethics. And I do think that, from a document standpoint, it is burgeoned to a fairly large document to cover a lot of issues. From my standpoint, I think, a lot of information in there is good, kind of giving, focus on how boards and commission and council members should act in certain conditions. I do think it is a hodgepodge of boards and commission and council. So I do think, if we talked about cleaning it up a little bit, there's some levity as far as the quotes are concerned, which only provide a certain amount of interest. But I do think that from a document standpoint, it intermixes, council and board and commissions, and having our board and commissioners review all I'll say that there are multiple sections that are very specific to council. And I know that I don't know how helpful it would be or how difficult it would be to separate those out, but, trying to make that document read a little bit more, I do think it does have value, and taking out all the specific examples, that are specifically council related and moving them to its own section, I do think has a certain amount of value. That being said, how do you conduct your representation of the city? How do you interact with staff? How do you interact with your other council members or board and commission members? I do think that there's a lot of valuable things in there that shouldn't be lost. I do think that we've attempted to cover a large, a lot of the end cases over the years to try to make sure that we're covering the, let's say, bad actions of a specific commissioner through some time in the past. And some of the examples are a little long-winded, but in general, I do think that there's a lot of value in the document. I think it's the final page of best practices, and then kind of the overall document, having just at least trying to separate the focus for a board and commission member versus a council member, I do think has a lot of value. And so that's my one big takeaway. It's difficult, we could do a lot of wordsmithing on how to clean up a specific section or not. And I've talked with a few people that are willing to undertake that effort and conceivably bring it back, but it becomes a much bigger effort, as we always see when we do like a charter review. And so I'm not sure if the changes required are to that level, but how to simplify, I'd be happy to hear from my other subcommittee members on what they might think. Next up, Councilmember Larson.
Thank you. So I have a number of thoughts on the document. So first of all, there is a lot of good information in there. And I think my concern is primarily that the document has become too big and too broad, that we refer to it as the Code of Ethics, but it's really much more than just ethics. The ethics are just a few pages out of it. Most of it is actually relating to conduct. And the document takes a very broad view of what is considered conduct, almost to the point where like any action that we take could be considered conduct. And so, you could actually, under that definition, you could pull in a lot of different things from the current council policy manual and say, well, it's all conduct, it should go in there. There is some value in having everything in one document, but I think there's also, it becomes less effective when it becomes too large. The current document is everything from ethical standards that everyone must uphold and are really, really important to, well, here are some suggestions of how to handle particular situations. And I think that's almost too broad of a range. It's almost like mixing in our zoning standards with our design guidelines all in one place. There's a reason why we have the zoning standards, what you must do, and then the guidelines are recommendations, but they're sort of a softer recommendation. And so organizationally, I'm thinking about, would it be possible to divide up this document so that especially the ethical parts and the standards that are the must do things are in one place, and then the other recommendations on how you run a meeting if you're the chair, or how you participate if you're on the board and commission. That maybe that's more of a handbook for commissioners on how to carry out their role. Yeah, so I'm reluctant to lose any particular content that's in there now. I've read through there and it's like, well, this is good stuff. It's good material. It's just, how do we convey what's the important part versus the nice to know part? The only potential addition that I thought of would be to bring up social media, because that's not covered in the current guidelines. And especially with the changes in state law to the Brown Act related to social media, while it might be duplicating what's in the state law, I think it would be useful to remind people of some of the key points there that might not be obvious, especially like the prohibition on responding to a fellow board or commission member or council member on social media. That's not when it relates to city business in any case. That's new, and I think a lot of people don't really understand or appreciate the implications of that yet. And certainly that can be covered in training, but I think social media is going to become more and more a part of how our commissioners interact with community. And this would be an appropriate place to lay out some of those guidelines. So, but I think for me, the main thing is really organizational. How do we have the appropriate level of focus on the must do versus good suggestions of how to conduct yourself? Thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Hendricks.
Okay, well, I just want to remember, I did have one specific thing we had to fix in the language that as related to how council members went and acted at board and commission meetings. One of the comments we heard that from the public speakers when we had this item was, well, the document's too long. And I'll just say up front, I don't care. If you can't read, that document, which is actually not that long, then I don't think you should be a board and commission member. I actually reread it every year when we do this, because I was on boards and commissions for 6-7 years before I got into the council. I've read it 7 times. On one hand, I could go, here, I don't need to read that, but I read it every time to remind me of all these different things. And Gustav, you brought up, well, here, some of the stuff, it's you mentioned like here, planning documents, but most of the stuff that's in there, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's all situational and contextual of how you respond and what you should do in a given situation. It doesn't, we're human beings. We don't have this exact lockstep of how we do stuff. So it's almost a for instructional purposes only type document. It's not that you're going to ever come across or be in that specific example of what it says in the document, but it's to help you think about that type or that kind of situation that you might find yourself in, and what you want to do. I think part of, we're saying here it's ethics and conduct. Well, then we should change the title to ethics and conduct. Okay, that takes care of a lot of the problem right there. I do agree we could probably do some organizational things. I'm struggling with how we would structure a motion or direction to staff of what we would want them to go do. How do we, give them direction to go, go fix the organizational part of the document so it reads easier and stuff like that, and that they would have enough, understanding of what that is, that they could bring something back to us that would be successful in meeting that task. So I don't necessarily, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of good content in there. I'm not really interested in losing very much of it. But if there was a way to try and do something organizationally, make it easier to read or something like that, I'm okay with all that. I just don't want us be having to do all this wordsmithing in a meeting. And how do we give direction to staff that would kind of do what I think we kind of understand you were suggesting, Gustav, but how do we do that in such a way where they could successfully come back and achieve your goal? So that's kind of my concern, if you've got ideas of how to make that happen.
And let me add a comment first. Or a question first. As far as and I agree that there's a lot of good information captured here. From an onboarding standpoint for our new board and commission members, I do think that this has a lot of value. Do we have a separate document from an onboarding standpoint, or, and I know each board and commission is slightly different, but that being said, there's a lot of this is how to conduct yourselves, how to deal with meetings, how to deal with the public, how to deal with staff. And is there another document, or is this kind of the rule of thumb in a yearly reminder?
So when we do new member orientation, this is one of the documents that's covered in the training. A few of the topics that are in here are not necessarily duplicated, but similar content is in the council policy on boards and commissions, particularly some of the, this document goes into a little more depth of, in these scenarios, here's how you interact. But the council policy on boards and commissions also has, sections that talk about when board and commission members are in a meeting, out in public, interacting with staff, et cetera. And both of those are covered when we have new member orientation. The new member orientation is 2 hours, and there's a lot covered. And I think as a new member to a board and commission, there's folks that are on here that at one point were a new board and commission member. It's probably not the same as being a new council member as far as the size of the fire hose you're drinking from, but I think it's still a pretty good sized fire hose of information that you take on, and that's just the orientation that's with the clerk's office and the attorney's office. Then each department does their own board and commission specific orientation. So this is a piece of a bunch of information that is shared with them when they come on board.
Okay, just checking. Thank you, Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, thank you. So one thought I had would actually be to take the ethics section and make that one document, and then make the rest, the conduct, more of a handbook. And that would actually be one way to cleave the existing document without having to do a lot of wordsmithing. The title of the document is actually already Code of Ethics and Conduct. And most people forget about the conduct part and just talk about code of ethics. And yet most of the document really is about conduct. At the end, there's a statement that we ask people to sign every year that says, I agree to abide by this document. And it kind of bothers me that some, like the ethics, I think that's clear that we expect people to be ethical, and they, if they violate that, that's serious. The code of conduct, which, as the vice mayor pointed out, those are more shades of gray, and suggestions on how to handle different situations, but you're never going to be in exactly those situations. Having someone sign a document that says, I agree to these suggestions that are admittedly flexible and hard to apply exactly, it bothers me more. And that's another reason why I want to kind of separate out the two, and why I think the conduct might work better as like a handbook that boards and commission members can have, and even council members can reference. But I think just the way the document is structured, there is a pretty clean way to separate out most of it already. So those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Hendricks.
Yeah, I'd want to hear, staff's opinion on, the ability to go ahead and kind of, do this into different, documents or formats. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But I do want to, say, I actually think the conduct is just as important. I don't want to go into the details, but while I was the mayor, there was an individual on one of our boards and commissions who did something conduct-wise that they shouldn't have done. It never had to come, the person decided to resign before it was brought as an item to the full council to have to address. But I think those conduct things, I wouldn't want to lose, and I don't know that you were necessarily trying to say this, Councilmember Larson, but I wouldn't want to lose the severity of, you know, what it means to conduct yourself, especially in a board and commission meeting where you are representing the city of Sunnyvale and the residents of Sunnyvale, and as well as, you know, outside stuff. So I don't want to lose that context of that in what we do. And then does staff have any thoughts and on, you know, what it would mean to potentially separate the document along the lines that Councilman Larson was suggesting?
So your trivia bit for today's meeting is that on April 8th of 2008, that is when these two documents were combined. Prior to that, they were two separate documents. So, you know, I think staff, I think we would be able to separate them, particularly knowing that at one point they were separate. We could kind of see where they became commingled and separate those things out. I think that would be an easier task than sort of the blanket, please go forth and update without a little more direction of what exactly, you know, we can wordsmith, but we would at least want to have some direction onto the type of wordsmithing we're trying to do. Because at the moment, you know, we've heard a lot of different concerns, both in these subcommittee meetings and, you know, at the council from board and commission members and members of the public. And there's a lot of different good ideas, and we would need, you know, some more concrete, specific direction to know what path to go down on making any kind of changes that are, you know, more specific than just, you know, separating these two into different documents.
And one thing I would say in terms of Vice Mayor Hendrick's comment about conduct, if conduct is going to be specified, then you need to have a sanction section. And so you would end up having two documents, one dealing with conducts and one dealing with ethics, but both should also have sanction sections, which the council could then say, these are the grounds for which we're removing a commissioner because of his conduct, either in the situation that you referred to was clearly over the line, or in another situation, just where a commissioner is being abusive to staff and yelling at staff or calling them stupid or, you know, or profanity or something like that. I could see why they put them together because the sanction would be very similar. And I can also see why separating them would be easier because the role that for sanctions for a commissioner are different than the sanctions for council members. And so I think you would want the commissioner to agree to abide by both. And you would have to find a way, if you do a handbook, having a council member agree to both the conduct. But I mean, it could be done. When we hire employees, we often have them sign receipt and acknowledgement of multiple policies. So it can be done either way. It just might be, well, 5 years from now, somebody say, well, why do we have two documents? And why don't we put them back together? So, but you know, that's a policy issue for the council. I think it can be done either way. It could either be a section that deals with conduct, a section that deals with ethics, a section that deals with commissions versus council and distinguishes them, and then a sanction section that deals with everything. Could all be in one, or it could all be separate too. I mean, whatever way the council wants us to go, I'm sure David and I and Terry and other staff members who will be working on this can bring something back for the council's consideration.
And John, there is something in the document, if I remember, and I just did a quick search on serious infractions, the code of ethics or the code of conduct. So this is still probably when the documents merged, could lead to other sanctions as deemed appropriate by council. And you know, the as appropriate by council could be removal, everything else. And I do think that moving, you know, that phraseology to, you know, if it becomes separate documents, and we'll talk about that, you know, later from a vote standpoint. But I do think that the concept of having a whole sanction section and all that, I think is very, as Vice Mayor Hendricks said, is very case specific. Is this a one-time occurrence? How serious it was? There are shades of gray as far as that's concerned. So going, into a lot of depth to try to figure out what those sanctions are, I don't think has a lot of value. That being said, that sanctions are possibly, could be implied from a document standpoint, and something that the council could do, the mayor could do, would be, to me, I think is at least listed there and not specifically called out. I think that makes sense to me, because we have other things from a council standpoint, council policy, as far as, dealing with a council member that has gone, in a bad direction. So at least it is in there, at least some portion of sanctions, and having a large section of sanctions, I don't think has a lot of value, at least in my take. Vice Mayor Hendricks?
Yeah, I just want to say, it's very complex. The sanction thing, I think, is more important to define a process, especially, for board and commissioners. The process here, is you go back in front of, the council can make a decision about you, right? They're the ones who appointed you. Essentially, they can unappoint you or whatever, might be. So it's more what the process is. The process for, if it's a council member, is a lot more complicated, because the council has to take on the role for the voters, right? And especially now with what we have with, districts and stuff, what goes on. So I think defining what the process is, as opposed to the specific what happens to people, is probably more important. The more I'm hearing about, well, here it's a board, ethics and conduct for council, ethics and conduct for boards and commissions, and all these different subcategories. I'm actually more liking the whole thing together, but I'm willing to kind of go with the flow of what you guys are thinking.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to circle back to the vice mayor's example that he had to deal with personally. And just looking at the conduct section in the current document, I think there would have been plenty of grounds just in the ethics section. It clearly rose to the level of an ethics violation. And the conduct section may have given some more specific, related examples that could have been referenced, but I think definitely it rose to the level of ethics. And I think that's, because it was a very serious situation. I think, as far as the comments regarding sanctions, I agree with focusing on the process, because it is very situation specific, and that's just no way to define that in advance. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Hendricks.
Yeah, just, I wanted to give a little bit of context for some of the people that are here, our board and commission members. Most of these things where we talk about when something comes up and it has to be dealt with, where it usually starts and has to be dealt with is in the mayor's chair. And that's true whether or not it's something that happens on the board and commission side, or there have been times where the mayor has to go ahead and have discussions with his council colleagues about something that's going on. So I just wanted to highlight, that's why it makes the decision about who is the mayor. There's a lot more to the mayor than just sitting and running our council meetings and stuff. So I just wanted to highlight that for people. And I'll also say, thank you to Larry, because I think he's doing a fantastic job.
Thank you very much. And definitely I've had to talk to council members and board and commission members over the last few years on different subjects. So, it is kind of a process standpoint, and not you don't want to air your dirty laundry if you don't have to, but a course correction, a good discussion can make a big difference and improve behavior for council members and board members. So anyway, that being said, let's go ahead and, Terry.
I'll raise my hand real quick. So we're not making a whole lot of progress, and we're scheduled to conclude today at 4. So we're a little behind already. But I think that staff would be happy to work together between now and our next meeting and come up with maybe some suggestions for the subcommittee to consider and let you see what maybe multiple versions of a document might look like, to see if that might clarify something for you, or at least see it in writing, and then help you decide what you would like to move forward with to the full council.
Okay, that would be useful. I don't want to make too much additional work for staff at the end of the day. But yeah, I do think that at least kind of trying to, you know, and I know why we broke it up 14 years ago, or why we merged it 14 years ago and are looking to break it up 14 years later. I'm not completely sure of at this point, but I do think that we've heard this from, multiple people as far as trying to at least simplify it into 2 documents maybe, and at least having the ethics portion and conduct a little separate, but I'll see what staff can propose. So thank you, Terry. And I know that other people have had 4 o'clock cutoff, so I will move this meeting forward. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. Since we remain in a virtual setting, I'll ask the public to use the virtual raise hand button and dial star 9 on your telephone. If you wish to speak, the city clerk will then ask you to unmute your microphone when it's your turn to address city council or the subcommittee. City clerk, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, first up is Daniel Bremen, followed by Donna Eskridge. Daniel, you've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes to address the subcommittee.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello,
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Daniel.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Mayor Klein, Vice Mayor Hendricks, and Council Member Larsson. My only contribution would be, in order to allow Commissioner to maximize the impact of this document, can we each year specify what has changed? For example, either by highlighting the new text, or if the staff can make a separate additional document highlighting the chapter or the paragraph or the item that has changed, because it is a long document, and for people that read it every year, I think that it will be very helpful if we can go directly what is not the same that last year. It is all what I was suggesting now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Donna Eskridge. Donna, you've been unmuted and you have 3 minutes to address the subcommittee.
Hello. So I'm looking at the document right now, and I mean, 19 pages, including the cover, is really not that much to read. You could almost speed read through it. But just looking at it, I mean, if you wanted to break up ethics and conduct, ethics is only 2 pages long, and it runs over to page 5. And then conduct starts on page 5. If you push conduct to its own page, then you don't pretty much have ethics would be the front of it. Conduct is in the middle, then you have a whole separate, so it's already divided. But if you push conduct to another page, then that would almost make its own section. And I'm not sure about hyperlinking, but if you had this document and you thought about its non-paper form and had hyperlinks to the different sections for ethics, conduct, and sanctions, then somebody could just click on ethics and just read that part, click on conduct and read that part. Like I said, it's only 19 pages. It's not really a huge read. And if you include the cover and the page that you have to sign, it's only 17 pages and glossary terms. So it's not that big of a document. So I don't think it has to be separated. It could maybe just be repaginated a little differently and maybe add some hyperlinks to make it easier to get to the certain sections. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, that was the final public speaker on this item.
Okay, I'll bring it back to my subcommittee members. Vice Mayor Hendricks.
I say that we take the assistant city manager's suggestion and let them give it a whirl. And I don't know if that has to be a motion or not.
John, does that need a motion, or we've given feedback and
You've given direction, I guess, yes. I mean, I think we all understand our tasks. So
Terry's signed up for the work, so I think she knows what she needs to go do.
yeah, I could make a motion that Terry's in charge of the drafting.
Okay, so I don't think we actually need a motion there. Cool. Okay. Any other comments on this item? And thank you. You know, definitely we review this on a yearly basis, and all the board and commissions do, and we get different feedback. Yeah, it is only 19 pages, but there's great information there. I think that was probably one of the reasons why it was merged 14 years ago. We'll see what Terry and staff can come up with. So, okay, with that, let's go ahead and move to adjournment. We'll adjourn the meeting at 4:12 p.m. I want to thank everyone for participating. Sorry we went a little bit late, and have a good evening. Good night, everyone.